All right, so today we're going to be talking about tips for time management. So we're live on Twitch right now. We're going to be talking about time management. This will be uploaded to YouTube. So I made this in 15 minutes, this presentation, just to show you guys. If you kind of go throughout this presentation, you're going to notice that a lot of these tips are going to be applied into the presentation itself. So I timed myself, I put everything together from start to finish, 15 minutes, and I've just gathered all the advice that I think is going to help you guys out. So here's what we're talking about. I have it organized into sections. If you guys watch my YouTube videos, on my main channel, right, you'll probably notice that I'm using the same format that I do for my presentations on YouTube. So these are going to be our sections. We're talking about relation to esports, long-term versus short-term, organizing, information, functional design, multiple projects if you're working on, 2, 3, 4 projects at the same time, as well as some last-minute tips and just final pieces of advice to close it out, right? So here's our table of contents. This will pop up kind of every once in a while, right? Okay. We'll start off with esports. The main reason why I decided to make this presentation in the first place. Relationship to esports. This is super important in regards to time management and esports, right? The reality of the situation in esports. Things happen every single day in esports, in the industry, the community. If you go on social media, every single day. Bunch of new things happening all at once. Content creators, organizations, stuff like that. And that's just how, that's the name of the game, right? Things happen all at once. Things happen very quickly. So the reality of the situation is you're going to be working, if you are creative, on projects and get no time to work on it, right? So you'll want to create this masterpiece, but in this industry specifically, most of the time, 90% of the time, you're going to have a day to do it. You're going to have a couple days to do it. And sometimes you might not even have that, right? So that's just how it is. And that's why we're going to be talking about these tips today. In my personal experience, I'm thinking about my relationship to 100 Thieves. So pretty much how it works, if you didn't know, 100 Thieves, when it comes to turnaround times, deadlines, stuff like that, what we do is we have long-term projects and short-term projects. So short-term is going to be the day-to-day stuff like, hey, in the past it was like, hey, we need a thumbnail. Hey, we need this graphic real quick. Like, hey, we have a post, we have a match today. Can you whip up this graphic? Those things take a couple hours. They just pop right in, right? So those go by very quickly. And then we have our long-term projects. So maybe it's a big announcement. Maybe we have something really huge going on in the team, or maybe we have something in the near future that we're trying to plan ahead for. We'll also have been notified those things on our schedule, on our calendar, and we'll work on that gradually over time as we're also doing the short-term projects. So it's kind of a mix between both. At the same time, personally, if you guys didn't know, I work with a company called Paper Crowns, or an agency called Paper Crowns, and how it works is you just take projects as they go. So any of the people at Paper Crowns full-time, like Lucas, for example, he's always working on, 3, 4, 5 projects at once. So for him, they are all of kind of equal importance, right? But he just has to split up his time and work on all of those 5 projects at once and find a way to distribute the time he has available to work on them and how he's going to approach everything, right? So we're going to talk about a little bit for both those situations, okay? But that's kind of esports, this industry, gaming, stuff like that. That's kind of how things move. Whether you work at an agency or you work at an organization, that's pretty straightforward, right? Moving into this idea of long-term versus short-term projects, I want to talk to you guys about how I approach this situation. Both situations, long-term, short-term, right? So I just have, this is how we're going to do the presentation. So moving into this section, these are these sub-points, the bullet points, just kind of help me keep my mind together when I'm going through this, right? So there's this idea of cutting corners for short-term projects, right? When you don't have a lot of time, you have to find a way to cut corners. So I'm going to talk about how you do that the right way and the wrong way and what most people do, stuff like that, right? There's also something, I don't know if this is an official term, you've probably heard variations of it. from some designer somewhere, but I'm going to call it the 99% rule and the 75% rule. These are probably going to be the biggest parts of the presentation, so you'll definitely want to stick around to see those. Okay, those two methods, I guess you could call them, is what helped me get through most of my work, short-term, long-term, stuff like that. Okay, so we'll start with this first point, cutting corners. This idea that you don't have as much time as you want, so you're gonna have to sacrifice something, right? I just whipped up together this really quick, what you could call maybe a design process. This is like your standard, what you would do if you're designing. I'll zoom in a little bit, but basically you start off with questions, so figuring out a little bit more details on the project. Research, so researching whatever it is you're working on, right? Exploration, this is when you start doing mood boards, sketches, like trying to figure out general idea what you want to do, right? Execution sounds, you know, pretty straightforward. That's when you start working on the project, you start putting everything together. And then refinement, you start working on those little details, make it look as good as it can be, right? So that's your general design process. Here's kind of the problem when people run into a short-term project, a really quick turnaround time, you don't have that much time to work on it, just get it done. This is what people do. They'll cut the corners by getting rid of the first two steps. So questions and research, they'll say, I don't have time to do it. I have no time to do any of this research. I'm just going to cut it out. I'm going to start straight with the exploration and just get into it, right? Just start working on the project. And the problem is that with that is these are pretty essential parts of the process, right? There's a reason why this is a step-by-step process, because step 1, step 2, step 3, they all lead into each other, right? So when you get rid of the first two steps, you don't have a very solid foundation, right? It's like if you're building a house, the first couple layers, right? If you neglect those first couple layers, if you neglect the base, the house is going to come falling down. So that's what's going to happen. If you start with exploration, execution, let's say the client, you show it to the client, you execute on an idea, you say, here you go. And they say, that's not what we wanted at all. It's probably because you missed the questions, you missed doing the research. They said, go back, restart, you know, figure something else out. Let's go back to square one. So you start back at exploration, right? You execute again. Maybe they say, you still need to fix, this isn't exactly what we're looking for, right? So you see like what ends up happening when you skip those first two steps, you're going to have to go back and forth, and you're ending up taking more steps than if you had just had these 5. But this is kind of the issue when you don't have a lot of time to work. What do you do? And the better way to approach short-term projects is to do something like this. So you see how there's a little bit of everything still there, right? Maybe you don't have enough time to ask all the right questions. Just ask the ones that are the most important. Research, maybe just get a general idea of what you're working with, what the audience is. Again, just focusing on these main points, right? Exploration, maybe you don't have time to do 50 sketches. Just try to do 5, right? Just get something out there. Just get some type of exploration, a couple ideas on the page, right? Executing, same. I would say this is probably the only thing that you can't really cut corners on. Like, you're going to have to execute on your idea some way or another. But for the most part, you see, you're just taking a little bit away. You're sacrificing a little bit from every single part. Even refinement, that's kind of why you see projects that are rushed. They don't look as refined because you have to just cut out a little piece of that time, right? So what's happening is you still have all your 5 pieces. You still have a full design process from start to finish. You're just cutting back on them a little bit. That's kind of the difference. You see here and here. So the general mistake that people make, and myself included in the past, is you just get super stressed out. I mean, this is obviously, I'm sure it's obvious to a lot of you guys just looking at it as words, but when you apply it into your own time, it's like, it's really easy to get stressed out when someone reaches out to you saying like, I need this tomorrow, you know? It stresses you out. It makes you just, okay, I just have to go. And you just forget about these things. So I'm telling you now, look at this, burn this into your mind. Just cut little bits off of each section, but make sure you keep that full process, okay? So that's kind of what I'm talking about with cutting corners the right way and the wrong way. Hopefully that makes sense. I think we can move on. I'm trying to speed through this so you guys can ask your questions at the end. And hopefully this can be a relatively short YouTube video for those rewatching it, right? So long-term versus short-term still, we're going to talk about my two favorite things. So the 99% rule and the 75% rule. I'm sure once I start talking about it, some of you might say, oh, I remember hearing that from someone. It's very common practice for design. But basically, it's this idea that you spend about 50% of your time refining the last 1% of a project. So what the heck does that mean? Basically, you guys, I'm sure any designers, any artists, have you ever gotten like near the end of a project? You're like pretty much done and there's just like a couple things you want to fix. Like maybe you move something like, oh, maybe I want to move this a couple pixels to the left. Oh, that doesn't look good. Maybe what does that look like? You know, maybe I'll move it down a little bit. You know, I'm sure everyone's had that experience. And you just keep doing that. You get so focused on like, oh, what if I move that and move that here? And these are very minor details. This is called like working in the micro level of design. So there's two different versions of design. There's macro level and micro level. Macro level is when you just lay everything out on the page. You know, when you go like this, okay, here's my composition roughly. And then the micro level is when you start like, okay, I'm going to push this here. That's when you start working on those little details. But what ends up happening is you spend so much time on that last 1%, right? And before you realize the project, your deadline, your turnaround time, it's already here. Like you need to turn in this project now. So I made a little thing in Illustrator. This is kind of what I'm talking about. So let's say this is a timeline from start to finish. You have your 0%, your 100%. That's your timeline design, right? So see how unbalanced this looks from 0 to 100%? You would think that it should be divided down the middle, right? 50% of your time in the first the first half, 50% of your time in the second half, right? But what ends up happening is what I was just saying. 50% of your time gets focused on this tiny little section of refinement, this micro level of refinement. So what you end up doing, what you should end up doing, any great designer most likely uses this practice, is you just take that 50% of your time to get it 99% there. Just get it like it's basically done. It's so close to being done. There's no point in doing these like tiny, you know, move this here, 1 pixel, 2 pixels, whatever. And what ends up happening, right? You see this extra 50% of time that didn't get used. You can carry that over into the next project, right? So it just saves you time because now the next project you're working on, if you're working on, let's say 2 projects at the same time, you just gave yourself a whole bunch of extra work, extra time to work on this stuff. You have 50% of whatever it would have taken you for this other project, right? That's the general idea. So get the project 99% done. I know that most of us are perfectionists at heart, and that's why it's difficult to kind of get through this concept. It was the same for me because I'm like a perfectionist. I want it to look as good as possible. But once you get into the industry, you start working full time for these design jobs, this practice will just get you so much further. Because you have to realize when you save yourself time, it also means you'll improve faster, right? So it's really important to keep that in mind. So we spend 50% of our time refining the last percent. That's kind of what that idea is, the 99% rule. The 75% rule, I feel like I probably don't need to explain. I think I might have, you guys get it now, right? This idea of percentages, chopping up your time. The 75% rule, if you have no time to work on a project, if they say we need this in an hour, just go, right? 75% is all you really need. Because most of the time, when it comes to this, like I was saying earlier, this macro level of design, when you're working on, a project, the macro level is going to be the main components. So getting the most important information on the page, you have a general idea of where everything goes. That's going to happen in the first half of the project generally. And then in the second half, you'll start refining, right? So if you can get 75% done, get the main pieces on there, the most important pieces, and you can list them too. You can write them down or type them out, whatever you want to do. Whatever project you're working on, figure out what the most important things, what do I need to have on here for it to be recognizable for what it's supposed to be. And then you get a little bit of time to refine it. 25% of the time, you know, you won't have time to work on it. So that's kind of this idea, the 75% rule. The 99% rule, I dedicate more towards longer term projects. 75% rule, if you need to do it in a day, if you need to do it in an hour, just get it 75% of the way there. I had a I guess mentor at my old job when I worked at a studio in my local city. There was this guy, amazing designer named Kenji. You guys might have heard me shout him out here before on the stream, but he is a super talented designer, but he's extremely lazy. And basically he admits to that too. If he's watching this, he knows. He said that he's a lazy guy naturally, right? But he kind of showed me this way of like, just make work that's good enough. So to give a little bit more context, when we worked at this studio, it was to create like flyers, posters for events. So performances, shows, and stuff like that. And in his mind, he's thinking to himself, like, the turnaround times are pretty quick and the poster is only going to be up for like a day or two. So I'm just going to make it just good enough. I'm going to get to that 75% and I'll move on to the next poster, right? So you just have to think about the context of what you're working on. If it really does need to be turned around quickly, just get it good enough, right? Good enough to be put out in the world and people don't have to question like, wow, that looks really ugly, right? Okay? So that's probably the most important parts. This 99 and 75% rule, I think you guys understand it now, so I can move on, right? We'll talk about organization. So what do I have here? This presentation is an example. So I wanted to show you guys how I put this together. If you were here at the very start, you'll see that I made this presentation in 15 minutes. So we'll talk about how I personally organized it, right? If I can find my spot. Yeah, this presentation is an example. So what I did is before I even focused on laying it out on this composition, I literally just took a notepad and I typed out, okay, what are the most important things? So I started off with, okay, I'm going to need an intro. Oh, here's a great hook. I made this in 15 minutes. Perfect. I'll just make that my intro, my hook to the presentation, okay? And then I started listing out these bullet points. So relation to esports, I just got my ideas out on this page. 99% rule, 75, perfect. I put these in parentheses, okay, long term, short term. And these are just little notes to myself, right? I have no idea what order I'm going to put this in, how I'm going to lay it out. It's just getting the information out there so you know what the heck you're going to be putting on the page. And over time, I mean, this took me 5 minutes. I just dug in my brain, took out different pieces of advice, and just threw it on this notepad. And once I got all of my ideas down, I felt like, okay, this is probably enough information to make a full stream worth of content, right? That's when I opened up my InDesign and I was like, all right, how am I going to section these? I came up with this little, okay, I'm going to divide all of this notepad information. I can probably put into 6 sections. I came up with headlines for each section, right? Esports, organization, multiple projects, just the main points. And then I started taking all of these bullet points and I started dividing them into, okay, this bullet point looks like it makes sense for esports. This bullet point makes sense for organization. And you kind of just create these puzzle pieces and you just fill in the pieces until you have your like completed section. So that's the process of making this presentation. You'll see that I still had a design process. If we go back here, I'm not cutting any corners by removing anything completely. I still did my planning. I asked my questions, you know, what do I need to have for the stream today to make it successful? I questioned it. I did, you know, my research, dig into my brain a little bit. Okay, what information is going to be helpful for people, right? Exploration, whatever. So I had a general design process and I kept all of these pieces, these steps together to create what you're looking at right now, this presentation, despite it being done in 15 minutes, right? And that's just kind of how you do things. That's how I do things. Even when I work on big projects, I'll always start up a notepad and just bullet points. What are the main things I need to do? How do I need to group this information, right? So if you're working on a project, let's say an advertisement, figure out what information is going to go on the page. What do they want to advertise? What's important to them? Stuff like that, you know? Basically just keep the full design process and it can be super quick. So obviously this takes no time at all, you know? I think there was a quote in a video that I did from Albert Einstein that was like, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I would spend the first 55 minutes coming up with the right question and the next 5 minutes to actually like solve the problem itself. So that's kind of you're doing your preparation. The preparation helps a lot, right? This is why it's so important to organize. I think that's what this section is, right? Organization. That's why it's so important. Once you get this information, once I had this on the notepad, it was a breeze. I mean, like 10 minutes to just put it in this nice fancy presentation and InDesign, right? But yeah, another example, my branding. So you guys can maybe use this as like a personal story. You can take it as you want, but pretty much when I was coming up with my brand style, obviously I have influence from like Swiss design, typography, like that's all really important for me. But when I was creating my brand, I was thinking in the back of my head, hey, I'm probably going to be designing, I'm going to be working on projects as I'm teaching, as I'm creating content. Like I'm not going to have a lot of time on my hands to have this brand style that is super extravagant, decorative. Like I just don't have that time. I see people on Twitter, if you see like headers, Twitter headers, there's some people out there that will spend like 80 hours to create a header. And it looks phenomenal, it looks fantastic. But for me, like I don't have 80 hours to come up with a presentation for a stream that I'm going to do every single week. So when I was creating this brand, I thought to myself, like, as far as time management goes, what can I do that's just really simple, really flexible? And I just landed on this, like, all right, I'm going to make it black and white, basic typography in the edges and stuff in the center or off to the side, like kind of larger, right? So this has been like my general brand style. And because of the way I organized it when it comes to time management, if I need to come up with a presentation in 10 minutes, like I got it. So you can do what you want with that information, but that's basically like, if you want to integrate time management into your process, your design process, you can ask yourself those questions. If you're working on a brand, maybe think about how much time they're going to have, right? How much time will that brand have available? So how, like, you know, for 100 Thieves, I could even talk about 100 Thieves for just like 2 seconds, right? 100 Thieves brand style is super easy to work with. It can be easily replicated, like you see people copy it all the time, but for the most part, it helps us get the message out super quick. People see the brand, they relate it to 100 Thieves. Like it's a very good time-friendly brand style for me and Sesso to work on, since it's just the two of us and Webb now with the thumbnails, right? But yeah, so those are some examples. And that's, as far as organization, that's kind of what I would sum it up to, right? Functional design though. Let's talk about this. They kind of bleed into each other a little bit, but functional design and this idea of organization. If I relate back to my brand style, my brand, I would say, is very functional, right? So this is super important when it comes to time management, is focus on the problem and also think about the user's experience before you start getting into decorating the project. Like obviously my personal brand, not very decorative. It's super straightforward. It's just some typography laid out nicely on a page. So figure out the problem. In my case, if you guys want another example, my problem when I was creating my personal brand is I don't have a lot of time. I need to get a lot of information across very quickly. How do I do that? And user experience, when you think about functional design, you want to think about the person who's experiencing what it is you're creating. So for you guys, you are my users, right? I'm creating these designs, I'm creating content information, it's going to you guys and you're experiencing it, right? So when I think about user experience, for my personal brand, the experience I want the user to have is I want you guys to learn something quickly and I want it to make sense. I don't want things to get confusing. I don't want things to be bombarded with all this decoration. So my focus, my problem, I think about all those things at once. I need to get this out very quickly. I want the user to understand it. This is where I ended up on. This is what I created as my solution to that problem, right? It's just straight bullet points, type. It's very hard to misunderstand because there's not really a lot of information on my brand style in the first place to get confused by, right? So find the purpose or the function first. I have a really awesome example that I found right before this stream started and I threw that image in here. So If you guys live in California, you know what In-N-Out is, but it doesn't really matter if you know it or not. It's basically just this fast food burger place. And I remember just driving through the highway. Billboards are my favorite design ever. Billboards are the most functional design you could find out there. You know, if you just go driving, you'll find functional design if you just go on the highway. And kind of what I mean by that is, let's say whoever worked on this advertisement or this project, they didn't have a lot of time to work on it. I don't know if that's true or not, but we'll just assume like ad agencies, they're pretty rushed. Like nobody gets the time that they want to work on a project, right? So here's super functional. When we talk about find the purpose, function first, the purpose is to get people in this fast food place when they're driving. So you have this really appealing burger. It's super large and it just says ahead on the right, In-N-Out. And with those 3 pieces of information, you know what the heck is going on. It's very functional. It's large. The text you can read. The In-N-Out logo is big enough for you to see and you just immediately know what brand it is. And obviously the burger, they have the largest because they want people to get hungry, right? So this is what I'm talking about with functional design. If you don't have a lot of time to work on something, what are the most important parts for the user to experience for it to be considered a good design, right? That's why Apple 90% of the time is super successful, because Apple focuses a lot on functional design. They obviously miss the mark on a few things, right? But that's basically what you want to consider. This design itself probably didn't need much refinement. It was super straightforward. I'm sure they didn't spend a lot of time refining it. They probably just put this on the billboard and they said, all right, this is good enough, get it out there. Send it off, right? So you want to have the same mentality when you're creating. Think about the purpose, think about the function of it first, and that'll help lead you in the right direction, right? Okay. Moving into multiple projects, section 5. Here's what we got. Identifying deadlines. So if you're working on multiple things at the same time, this is what we're going to be talking about. Deadlines, synergizing content, and looking at your past work. So when we talk about identifying deadlines. Oh yeah, okay. So this one's super straightforward. I mean, it's as simple as literally lay out all the projects you're working on, figure out your deadlines for both projects. Let's just say, for example, you're working on 2. Which one is more important? Which one's more crucial to getting done first? When do they need it by, right? So in the case of 100 Thieves, when we have our short-term projects and our long-term projects, we'll have a set of priorities, right? We'll say these projects are the most important. You know, they're going on YouTube tomorrow. We need them right now. This project has a few days. I know that sometimes it's really easy to be like, well, I feel inspired to work on the second project right now, you know? But for the most part, you need to figure out what your deadlines are, and not just the deadline for the end of the project. Figure out what the deadlines are in between. So all these steps. If I scroll back up real quick to these parts of the design process, there are deadlines to all of these, right? You have to have a deadline for your questions. You have to have a deadline for research, exploration. These are kind of the way you divide up your project so you can create sub deadlines for yourself and you can work on things a little bit more smoothly because they're in more digestible, like, okay, I have 2 days to ask questions, right? I have 3 days to research. I have, 4 days to explore, 3 days to execute, 2 days to define, or however you want to see it, right? So the main point is you want to create those sub deadlines, because if you just focus on one project is due in 3 weeks and one project is due in 2 weeks, it gets really complicated. But if you have them divided into these sections, it'll be a lot easier to group up, like, okay, well, maybe for both projects, I can focus on questions first, move on to my second project, focus on questions. You're able to divide it a little bit easier, right? Hopefully that makes sense. And hopefully maybe that's obvious to some of you guys, but I know that what I used to do in the past is I would complete a project from start to finish and then move on to the next project, start to finish. But it's a lot more digestible if you just focus on the same things. Questions, then research on both sides. You kind of build them up at the same time. And it becomes a lot easier too, moving into this next idea. So synergizing content. This is for the last slide, but it kind of applies to both. So synergizing content is this idea that if you're working on two projects at the same time, a lot of the time you'll observe things, you'll come to realizations that can apply to the other project you're working on. So that's why I say when you do questions, do both questions at the same time. Do your research at the same time, because you might discover some research in one project that can apply to the next one and make that process a lot faster, right? If you ask questions at the same time, maybe you come up with a really good question. You're like, wow, this question's awesome. I actually want to apply it to this other project I'm working on because I think it works. So that's this idea, you synergize content. So when you're working on these things, right, you build on them, right? Each project simultaneously, you're synergizing that content together and you're able to get it done faster, right? Okay, so this last idea. You are an accumulation of your past experiences. It doesn't just have to be content that you're working on at the moment. So your previous work is a great reference for if you have a short turnaround time, if you need to get something out really quickly. Basically, your whole life is based on your past experiences, right? So there is no problem going into your old projects, observing things like what's worked, what hasn't worked. You know, I remember on this project, I had this set of questions that was awesome. Let me just copy that over. It could even be like for myself when I work on freelance projects, if I have a creative brief or whatever, a mood board, and I have it formatted a certain way, I'll just think to myself, there's no reason for me to create a new mood board, a new creative brief. I'm going to take that template and I'm going to carry it over into this project and just plug in the information, right? So you want to think about all this stuff you've created in the past and use that as your references for future projects. Basically, what you'll be able to do is keep building on these projects you work on, and you'll have like this archive of content for you to pull back and reference when you do have these short turnaround times. I remember back when I used to be a montage editor, I did this the most because I would create an edit, I would create a montage for someone, and then I would have another montage that maybe they need done in a few days. What I'll do is I would like take the color correction, I'd take some of the effects, and I would apply them into the new edit, and I would just change them up a little bit. So color correction, you know what? It's basically there. I'll just paste it over. I'll fix some of the stuff. I'll make it fit the mood, the style of the brand, whatever. I'll just adjust it so it looks right, and I'll move on instead of having to start fresh every single time. Basically, you don't need to start over every time you start a new project, right? It should be a build-up. Every project is going to be a build-up from the previous things you worked on. And that's kind of what I'm talking about there, right? So work with what you're given. I don't think I really need to explain these last-minute tips, but sometimes you just get put in a certain situation. You just have to work with what you got. You have to realize, right? I guess moving into this thing, you can be mad at the world after you're finished with the project. So I know that when you get handed a lot of stuff, and let's say you have a lot of information, you get given something, you get given a bad hand. You know, it happens all the time, especially in esports, where you don't get the pieces that you want to work with, right? You have to work with what you're given. But what happens, it's very easy to get emotional if you get, like I was saying earlier, you get stressed out. They say, we need this tomorrow, but you're like, I need more, like I don't have enough. You have to work with what you have. And if you get too stressed out, if you get angry when the client or whoever you're working with comes with whatever, and they say that to you, we need this tomorrow. If you get angry, it's going to make you work slower. So it's very nice to get accustomed to holding that in, finish the project first, and then you can be as mad as you want after it's over. But if you let it affect your work, you're going to work slower and you'll be even more upset. You'll be even more frustrated when you don't get the project done, or you're exhausted at the end of it because the whole time you're furious, like you're working on the project. You're just like, I don't even want it to look good. You know, I'm going to make it bad on purpose. It's very easy to get emotional, right? I mean, and this is from personal experience too. That happens all the time. It's kind of inescapable. A client will just come up to you and ruin your day. Just let them ruin your day after you finish the work, because you're going to get paid for it, and then you're chilling. You'll realize maybe there wasn't even a reason to be mad. Like maybe it just ends up working out and you're just like, all right, perfect. You know, that wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Most of the time it isn't. I don't know if you guys have had that experience, but most of the time when you work on a project that is not exactly what you expected and maybe it needs to be done sooner than you wanted it to be, by the end of it, it ends up working out and you're fine. You're like, oh, cool. Well, now I have more time. Like I'm chilling. I didn't think I would finish it that fast. That happens all the time. So just wait. The frustration can wait. Just finish the project and then assess if you want to be mad at the world, right? Okay, here's my favorite one. Breaks are a part of the process. You guys hear me talk about this all the time. Breaks are not a bad thing. Breaks are great. Sleep is great. The grind, the hustle, you know, it's all a myth, right? For some people, I know Skylar Johnson is like the perfect example of someone who is just only about the hustle. Some people are just built different, right? I know Skylar just doesn't take breaks. Skylar Johnson, the founder of Paper Crowns, he just doesn't take breaks. But most people are not built like that. I'm not built like that. I have to take breaks a lot. Here's the thing that's really important for designers. Any of you like designers, artists out there, your brain goes through a process when you sleep, and that process helps you be more creative. It's almost the same as when you take a shower and you get like crazy ideas in the shower, like, oh, I need to write this down when I get out of the shower. This was such a good idea. Your brain goes through that type of process while you're sleeping. So staying up for 48 hours to get ahead on work will actually normally end up putting you behind. So sometimes you don't have a choice. Sometimes you have to stay up for 48 hours because that's the turnaround time. But if you have the option to take a nap, rest it off, just think, let your mind breathe a little bit. If you feel like you're getting fatigued midway through a project, that usually means that you need a rest. And if you rest, you'll come back being refreshed. You might even have some new ideas as soon as you wake up. So breaks are important. Recognizing rest is not a bad thing. The grind can stop. The grind will basically, if you rest and you take a break, it'll actually put you further ahead. So it's just this kind of, I mean, you guys have all heard this, but like, think smarter, not harder. So people that take breaks, that's thinking smart. You have to let your mind rest. It's the same as, maybe I should have put this in this section, but in this whole design process, rest should be in one of these sections, in between one of these sections, right? Ideally, rest should be in between each section, but sometimes it doesn't work out like that. But it's a part of the process. Taking a break is a part of the process, and don't let anyone tell you that it's not, because that's how you do it, right? All right. So that was it. Tips for time management. Thank you guys for watching. And those of you on YouTube, I'm live every Saturday, 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Twitch, Nowack Design. So if you want to see this live, I'll see you next week or in a couple weeks, whatever. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. And that's it.